Hi, Mr. Shapiro. Thank you for coming. I'm a big fan, and I agree with you on most things, but there's one topic that I want to hear you talk more about. My question pertains to firearm policy in the United States versus Australia. Between 1995 and 1996, directly before and after the gun buyback in Australia, there was a 36% drop in deaths caused by gunshot wounds, and that's the sharpest decline in gun-related deaths between 1989 and 2014 in Australia. Between 2001 and 2002, before and after the trafficking handgun agreements in Australia, the general homicide rate, not even specific to firearms, dropped by 17%, which was also the sharpest drop in homicides between 1989 and 2014 in Australia. Comparing Australia to the United States, between 2001 and 2014, there was a 44% decline in the rate of homicides in Australia compared to only a 19% decline in America. Given these facts, do you believe that policies similar to those enacted in Australia, specifically the gun buyback and the National Firearm Agreement, as well as the trafficking handgun agreements, do you think that similar policies in America would help reduce gun violence?
So I don't think that a gun confiscation policy or a gun buyback program like Australia's would be effective. First of all, important to note that it's unclear how much of the reduction in gun violence in Australia was actually due to the gun buyback. And the reason I say that is because only 1/3 of the guns that were actually bought back, meaning that 2/3 of the guns remain in circulation in Australia and remain in the homes of the people there. So the gun buyback was not responsible for a 100% reduction of the number of guns in circulation. It was responsible for a 33% reduction in the number of guns in circulation. Second of all, I'd actually want to see the statistics, because you're speaking verbally, I'd like to see the statistics that you're talking about, because the statistics that I have seen is that between 1994 and 2015, the decline in gun homicide rate in the United States was actually about the same as it was in Australia, without us actually engaging in the same policy. And in fact, there's a good article at the Washington Post. The woman's name escapes me. There's a woman who used to work for 538. I think her name was Leah Lebrescu. And she writes an entire piece specifically about the UK and Australia and contrasting their gun policy with the United States and explaining why this is not particularly apt as a comparison. And it isn't. I mean, the fact is that America's homicide rate, our gun violence rate, has gone down massively since 1994, despite the increase of the number of weapons in circulation tremendously during that same period. Right? We've actually increased between 1994 and now from, I think it's 250 million guns in circulation, about 400 million guns in the United States in circulation right now. At the same time, the gun violence rate has declined markedly. Also, when I see these statistics, very often what people tend to do is lump in suicide with homicide. So this is why I'm questioning the stats, just because I have different stats. But if you want to send them to me, I'm happy to have an email exchange about them, because I'm curious. I mean, I like more information. But what people tend to do when it comes to this sort of stuff is attribute sharp drops in homicide, which they include sometimes suicide in homicide, to the lack of guns. Well, if you want to shoot yourself, then this actually brings up a general question. Is it my job to remove a gun from you if you want to shoot yourself? I mean, you want to shoot yourself. Like, you could stab yourself. You could hang yourself. And Japan has fairly high suicide rates in certain places. They have virtually no guns in that society. So suicide is something we don't quite understand well on a social science level.
Mr. Shapiro, you talked about white privilege. And just this week, I had a conversation with Rachel Lazar, who's done some work, a Jewish American woman who's done some work on this area, as well as having extensive conversations with Dr. Greg Parks of Wake Forest University, who's also talked quite a bit about critical race theory. And it's my understanding that white privilege is not telling individuals that they cannot speak, but it is a term for societal privilege that individuals have as a benefit of their white skin. And I don't think that, and I think universities would be remiss to then say that because you're white, you're not allowed to say anything that's critical of white people. I didn't know that white privilege actually went into that sphere. My understanding is it's just, and the issue is that white privilege makes people uncomfortable to talk about the societal privilege that they have.
Well, to me, what I say on campuses all the time is, if you want to cite instances of racism that we can all find and fight together, That's something that I'm more than willing to stand next to you and fight, because that's obviously stuff that we should fight together. But when you just say that there is a white privilege out there in the ether and that by dint of birth your skin color generates for you an advantage, what you're really saying to people is that your view is less valuable because you have not experienced what I've experienced. And that is an identity argument, that's a character argument, that's not a rational political argument that can actually be taken on in any way. It's more of a cudgel and a club than it is an attempt to open a discussion.
Well, I think it's a demonstrable evidence that through society's demographics that being white has societal privileges that being black does not. But
we can talk about how that manifests, because that's
I'm
more
also
interesting,
interested in what you just said now, is that you would stand next to anyone who has this. So, Mr. Shapiro, my question to you is, for Ms. Dunston, the tying the noose around the campus and writing messages that target African-American young students, would you consider that hate speech, and then would you stand next to her and fight for her?
As I say, I would. This is the first I'm hearing about it, honestly. But
really,
yeah. But from hearing about it, maybe because it's local. I mean, I'm from LA. But in any case, I'm more than happy to stand alongside her and fight whatever group was responsible for this. Not only more than happy. I mean, you're talking about the alt-right. Again, I was the #1 target of anti-Semitic harassment from the alt-right last year.
Thank you.
I'm more than happy to do all that. And I think there's one more distinction that has to be made. When we talk about cases like Taylor's, they're horrific, and the administration is siding with Taylor. Okay, the administration is doing the right thing by Taylor, or trying to do the right thing by Taylor, as they should be. And I think that we need to make a distinction between cases where the administration is actively participating in the suppression of speech and cases in which the administration is trying to do the right thing in order to punish people for application of crime.